The question that we've been asked is when I have a client and then I intake a client and accept the retainer and actually later I invoice, what actually happens in uLaw? To explain that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a quick client. Let me create a new client by saying new contact, hit on the client button. Let's say it is Alicia Keys, and let's do a quick matter for her. Let's say the matter is actually a small claims matter. And I'll hit the save button. Now, the first and foremost thing that you're going to ask Alicia is for retainer. So when you get the retainer, you'll click on disbursements and retainer button. Click on new retainer. Let's say the retainer was $500 and the check number is say $789. Obviously you'll put the method of payment. Let's say it's check number, and you will do and apply. Now when you do that, what uLaw will do is you'll do a couple of things. It'll mark here saying retainer has $500. It also tells you that the balance on this account is $500. That means, like, if you don't do any work for this client, you actually owe the client $500. That's what this is actually indicating. And if you actually go to the account section, you'll see that we have put an entry here called retainer for Alicia Keys for that matter and the check number. And when you actually click on it, it will tell you what it has done. It's actually put a debit entry into the bank account and a credit entry into your liability account, saying that you actually owe Alicia $500. This can also be seen when you go back to the matter and hit the question mark button. So when you actually hit the question mark, it tells you, like, you haven't done anything so far. $500 is there in trust, as debited. And that's what you owe to the client, and you haven't done any work yet. So I'm just going to now put a docket here. Let's say, initial client meeting, and I can also put another docket here called, say, document drafting. I'm going to charge the first one, say, a flat rate of, $100, and the second one, a flat rate of, say, $200. That means total to $300. Since this matter is actually set to Ontario, so if you're going to charge HST, which is 13%, so when I hit the save button, you'll now see that the analytics starts projecting certain things. Like, for example, it's saying that this matter has a total projected invoice of $339. And if you'd actually do all the trust transfer, that was what would be left that you owe to the client. And $500 is still there in the retainer. So now if you can click here, it tells you that's like a projected value of about 67% of the retainer, and everything is there. So let's now actually generate the invoice. To do that, I'll hit document generation, invoice complete, and actually I'll hit the invoice and hit the download button. As you see in the invoice, like, the invoice clearly shows $339 of invoice, and it tells you that the balance in trust should be $161. But the balance in trust is not still $161 because we haven't done the trust transfer. So when I go back to uLaw and hit the question mark, it still tells me that $500 is still there in trust, $339 is what the invoice we have raised, and the pending transfer is that much. How does it do that? Is because when we actually raised an invoice, if I go to accounts and actually check for my accounts receivable, it'll mark a debit in the accounts receivable that Alicia, owes us $339, right? So when I go back to the matter and actually do a transfer, and I say trust invoice payment transfer, I pick that and I actually do the transfer. That's when the whole cycle gets complete. So in accounts receivable, it puts a trust transfer for $339. So when I actually click on this, it puts 4 entries. It says, I moved the money from my trust bank account into my operational bank account, which is TD Canada Trust. I also marked my liability as a debit. That means, like, I don't owe $339 anymore, and the invoice that I raised for $339 is also complete. So that's how uLaw completes the transaction. So now going back to the matter, if I would actually hit on the question mark, it will now tell you that there's no action required, everything has been paid for, and in trust you have $161. So to summarize, when you actually put the retainer in uLaw for $500, we put an entry in accounting. where when we actually click on this, you'll see that we debit the bank and credit the liability account. And then when you raise an invoice, we would have put an entry in just in accounts receivable saying that the client owes us that much money. And when you do a trust transfer, we mark the whole cycle where we transfer it from the bank account to your operational account, and we also mark the accounts receivable and the trust amount client.